It's good to have everybody here this morning. Good to see you guys. So I'm going to call on someone that is training for a half marathon to do our invocation. Now, I've got to see, is anyone around here training for a half marathon? That'll own up to it? Brian Kaiser. How about doing the invocation, leading us in the invocation? I
thought you were calling Bobby for a second.
You'll lead us in the invocation pledge before we pass it on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for today. I just, with all the people that are lonely and hungry in this town, I just thank you for the blessing we can get together, eat a really hot meal, and this camaraderie. And I just pray for the families represented in this room, for blessing over their households, and we just praise you for this day. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the things we think, say, and do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Christy, can I call on you for the sergeant?
Good morning, Ship. We have 34 members in attendance this morning. And we have a couple of guests with us. Lisa, would you like to introduce your guests?
I am happy to introduce my two guests here down dinner, Murphy Sullivan and Janice Burns.
Sure. Hi, I'm Janice Burns. I work with families and help them navigate looking for a place for their loved one, either independent, assisted, memory care, skilled nursing.
And I'm Murphy Sullivan. I'm a fundraiser for local nonprofits and a lobbyist.
Rick Martin, where are you today?
I'm here.
How live?
Reviewing the food buffet. Yeah, we got a few things today. Good morning, everybody. Don't club anniversaries. We got a couple of one Guilford birthday coming up next week. We're going to do this weekend, next week, anniversaries and stuff, because we just got the changing of the guard. Crescent Rotary Club, they had inducted their new president last night, but they don't call it the changing of the guard. Y'all may know Lisa Hazlett, and she had herself a coronation. So, man, think about that one. If you missed out, they should have granted the king. All right. Is Bob Haybrock here?
No.
All right. Bob actually has his birthday next week. Jim Kennedy?
No.
Trump. How about Scott Reber? All right. Mike Conrad is here. I know he's sitting at the wall on the table. But Mike, you and Ann have a wedding anniversary coming up.
Yeah.
When?
It's actually the changing of the guard night, so I don't have to pay. So it'll be 48 years.
That's exactly right. Congratulations, Mike. Way to go. Dr. Lane.
Not here.
All right. Well, we had a big list, but apparently all of them aren't here. So that is it, Mr. President.
Rick, thank you. Sometimes summertime, people go on vacations, and who knows what else goes on in the summertime. It's a little like that. Let's see, Matthew, is this the first week that I'm not going to call on you for an announcement? This is incredible.
You just made that comment.
That's incredible. I think I'll need to get with our club secretary and document
Could
this.
you just get up and say something?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
On the horizon, other announcements. We have changing of the guard next Wednesday, and I hope everybody signed up for that. It's going to be a great event. I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait to get Walton installed on that. And along those lines of important things, we have received the official Gold Club badge for our banner. We'll have that. I'll ask Steve if sometime he'll get that affixed to the banner, and we can document our achievement for this year. Let's see, Mike Conrad. We just got Mike Conrad back from overseas after being gone for about 3 months to the international convention. I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot just for a second. Can you give us a highlight, something that you enjoyed, or just something that stuck out from your experience at the international convention?
Okay. Well, look, it really is kind of great to be back. We were gone for 3 weeks, and I'm a homebody, and never been gone that long. But I just would encourage you, if you've ever been even to a district conference, this really takes Rotary to another level. When you go to an international convention in Hamburg, there was 26,000 Rotarians from all over the world, and we had, I guess it started on Sunday through Wednesday, and of course we're celebrating this past Rotary year with Barry Rassin, and let me just say that Barry Rassin, who is from our neighboring zone and has been many times here in our own district, has just done an incredible job as our RI president. He has visited over 70 countries in the year that he's been the RI president, and I think it was something like 325 days he's been away from home. I mean, so there's nobody that's put his heart and soul in being our leader more so than Barry Rassin. But in Rotary, we are all become friends, and the new Rotary theme for next year is Rotary Connects the World. And so we were able to meet, once you go to these, you're able to meet people that you've not seen for a year, and we were able, as a part of this, and the reason it was extended is we had met a couple from Finland. They had been in our home for a week. And by the way, this lady is going to be a Rotary International Director starting in 2020. And they had been wanting us to come to their home in Finland. And so that just made it natural for us to kind of extend and go to Helsinki. And then one of her friends wanted us to go to St. Petersburg, Russia. So we took a train, 3-hour ride, and went into St. Petersburg.
This is gonna cost you $1.
But anyway, this lady went with us, and she speaks Russian. So the experience of being in Russia with someone, and St. Petersburg is a beautiful city. So it's just like I said, Rotary connects the world. But what I want to say is next year, the Rotary International Convention is going to be in Hawaii. So that is a great destination if you've never been there, or if you've been there and you want to go back. So I can't say enough. And Frank was there, and Frank, you may want to add anything in your insight as well, in terms of your experience there.
Well, sure, actually I would. You know, I'm a newbie, as you know, and so these things are, you know, experiences that I wouldn't have had before. And the thing that overwhelms me, I've been to 3 international conventions now, and even I, to this day, think of Rotary as just sort of Greensboro and the surrounding area, etc. But until you sit down with somebody from India or from, you know, Scandinavia, Australia especially, and you have a 10-minute conversation, they're handing you their card and saying, I hope you'll come and see us, and you kind of all of a sudden realize that we're just a little part of one incredible organization that is totally supportive. Once you're there, if you're a Rotarian, you're their friend. It's really just quite overwhelming. I mean, I'll tell you, the Australians are on fire. I mean, no surprise, but boy, I'll tell you, they're with it. And it's so exciting to talk to them and listen to what they're doing.
Yep. And there'll be an international convention, I think after Hawaii, it's going to be in Melbourne, in Australia. So that'll be a great destination as well.
So it's great.
Great experience.
It's an incredible experience. I'll tell you, Hamburg shocked me as what a great city it was. And to have that experience was wonderful.
Frank, thank you. Frank, thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any other announcements for the good of the club? Not hearing any or seeing any hands go up? Let's do some happy dollars.
Let's do some happy dollars. All right.
The collective, you know, we had the collective wisdom. We missed you last week, but we did have Grandpappy Christensen, fortunately, here.
I got 3.
All right.
One, a lot of you have offered prayers and condolences. My dad passed away on Father's Day. And so, but with a lot of support and friends. He was 91. He lived an amazing, his story is amazing. So we celebrated him, and that was it. I was glad to have him. Update on Rosa and Victoria. Victoria's about to board a bus tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. She's going off to Colorado with Young Life. So if you have a prayer list, if you would add her to that. She's not only has she never been that far away, but she does have a severe nut allergy, and so that is always a concern, because she'll have EpiPens on her, but if she needs it, I'll be on a plane to wherever they are at the moment to assist her. And so her safe return, that's that simple prayer. Rosa will then, we'll take a 10-day trip when Victoria gets back and go up north, and Rosa will be at Drexel for a week, and Victoria and I are going to spend a week roaming around and visiting family, so our safe return for that. And then Rosa found out she's going to be one of the captains on the team for Paige next year, so she's like outside herself, ready to do some winning and everything. So anyway, we're very excited about that.
All right. Buster. I'm just real close. Okay, quick happy dollar. Ralph, that he's here today, I'm excited because last night we played tennis and he had about 9 injuries that he went through right before he played. Before we played, which is typical. He's putting on ankle bracelets. He's got shoulder problems. A lot of handicapping going on. But we had a good time. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the score, but you can tell I'm giving the happy dollar. Good to see you, Ralph. Glad to hear it.
Small part. I'll actually miss next week, changing the guard, because I'll be down in Hilton Head having some fun with family, but we're counting down the days, so there's 21 days left till we're welcoming the newest affiliate into the family, so super excited about that. I probably won't be here over the next few weeks, so keep me your thoughts.
Well, you remember the storm a couple nights ago? Well, my son Lance, I forced him on the swim team again. We were at Sherwood. Gail, is that your pool?
That is.
Okay. They were very hospitable, great people. And, you know, we had like a rain delay, and then they let everybody in start the swim meet. And then crazy lightning started happening, so my son has done 3 days of practice this year. And I pray, you know, we get through another couple of weeks. The city meet, and it's kind of crazy because it's the 4th of July is landing on that, so it's kind of pushed around. But yeah, I said it's a lot better than pulling weeds, so enjoy the swim meet.
A few months ago, I had put down my old dog Jesse, and I replaced him with my new dog Gretchen. Gretchen was a friend's dog, and they couldn't handle it, and it had torn everything off. I said, no problem, we'll take her to the office, we'll take good care of her. She's chewed up my 6-wheeler, system, most of the plants in the yard. She's eating a scrub brush. I'm not kidding, I was just telling Mike last night, I know she's going to operate on. But with Mike's help and some doggy Prozac, and taking her to the office every day, she is now off the training collar for 8 days and 12 hours.
Electronics, baby.
Well, you know, all these babies being born, Grandpappy gave me some great child raising advice. He said, you know, your first kid, they come home, they've eaten a little grass, maybe a worm, you rush them to the doctor. The second kid, they come home, they eat a little grass, dirt, maybe a worm, you spit on a handkerchief and wipe it away. The third kid comes home, they've eaten a little grass, a little dirt, maybe a worm,
and you wonder whether they still need lunch.
Thank you, Graham, Kathy, Lewis. And Chipper, is Gretchen available to work on kudzu and small fields too?
You're brave enough to pack her, I'm brave enough to bring her over there and turn her loose.
Okay, good to know. Good reference, everybody. Well, I'm so pleased. You know, I was hoping Walt would tee up a great meeting for a great speaker for our last meeting, breakfast meeting of the year. That is, and he did not get on that one. He's overseas in Scotland somewhere playing golf. But our speaker this morning, I'm so pleased to announce, is Jim Kirkpatrick. Jim is going to share with us and present on the Guilford Courthouse and why the Battle of Guilford Courthouse still matters today. And a lot of you who've been around Greensboro for a while know Jim Kirkpatrick's name. He's been a long-time public servant and part of our Jim's a graduate of Wake Forest University. He's served in the U.S. Marines for 3 years as an officer of infantry. And followed that with a 41-year encore at Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor. He's retired now, but still active in the community. He volunteers. He's on the board of Caldwell Academy and is the founder, president, and chairman emeritus of the Guilford Battleground Company. A lot of you will remember him from his public service to the community. He was elected 3 times to Greensboro City Council, served as mayor pro tem and at-large representative, and was also elected to the Guilford, to serve as a Guilford County Commissioner. Jim is married, has a son, 4 incredible grandchildren, I understand, and we did not even get a chance to talk about that at breakfast, so I'll regret that. Jim, looking forward to hearing about Guilford County, Guilford Battleground and the Fort Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Come, let us hear about it.
Great, thank you. If y'all will pull out my PowerPoint presentation. That's as close to technology as I'm going to get, but I will be referring to it. Can everybody hear?
Yep.
Okay, let me see what kind of hand I got dealt this morning at 7:30 in the morning regarding American history. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress in Philadelphia passed what bill? Document? The Declaration of Independence. Congratulations. Okay, let's get a little bit harder. There were 3 representatives from the state of North Carolina who signed that document. Who were they? Hold up your hand if you know.
How about if you knew it and you forgot it?
Okay. Their names, and it's good to remember this, were William Hopper, John Penn, and Joseph Hughes. Okay. Where are they today? They're dead, I know that. That's not a problem. But where are they located today? Those 3 men?
Cemetery out at the Battleground.
Okay, we got a good answer right here. 2 of them, Mr. Hopper and Mr. Penn, are buried out not 100 yards from General Green's statue in Greensboro, North Carolina. The other one died during the Continental Congress, and he's buried up in a Christchurch courtyards up in Philadelphia. In fact, when he died, they declared a national day of mourning for him. He was that influential in the founding of our country. We take everything we've got in this country for granted. I'm sorry, we do. When these men signed their names to that piece of paper, they just went to number 1 on the British most wanted list. And if they were caught, they were going to the nearest tree. That's the fact of life. That's the way it was. So what I'm going to get to and answer the question as we get to the end of this thing is, why should we still care about what happened here 200 and some years ago, about 4 to 5 miles that way, and what was in Guilford Courthouse, North Carolina? If you look at the PowerPoint presentation, I think you have in front of you, you will see how active our state and South Carolina were during the year 1780, 1781. All those little bright dots are battles that took place in our area. You'll also notice what you do not see. You do not see any Raleigh. You do not see Durham. You do not see Charlotte. Oh, you will see Charlottesburg. You will not see Asheville or Ashbury, any of those places. In North Carolina and Piedmont, North Carolina, it was basically Charlotte, Salisbury, and Hillsborough. That was it. In our state at that time, there were about 280,000 people spread out all over the state. The fastest growing area was right around here, but people just started coming here about 20 years before the war. Up until then, there was nothing here, just buffalo trails going crisscrossing through the area. The Indians had left earlier in the 1700s. They weren't even here when the first settlers showed up. So it was a much different place, a much different time, and it was a very tough time back in those days. Okay, but I'm going to answer the question when we get to the end of this, why this is important, after I give my little presentation to you today. And I'm going to tell you a story. And I want you to come back with me, and most of it's true. I want you to come back with me to the year 1780. And what started out as a little spat between some folks around Boston and the British government has now turned into a global world war. And Britain is not only fighting the colonists, they're fighting the French, and soon to be fighting the Spanish. They've got themselves in a real mess. And if you go up north, it's all kind of settled into a stalemate up north. You've got the British armies in Manhattan, and the Americans are all around them. Now, being a Brit in Manhattan in 1780 was not bad duty. Think about it. You got all those fine restaurants, you got the art museums, you got the Guggenheim, you got the Met. You got plenty to do. You know, cabs, they were a problem then, they were a problem today, but that's just the way it is. But you could get around. And if you really want to feel good about being a British soldier, all you had to do was go over to the New York, the Empire State Building, and ride up to the observation deck and look over the Hudson River into the American lines. And what did you see? You saw American troops who basically were starving. They hadn't been paid sometimes in years. They were in tatters. In the summertime, they froze. In the wintertime, they froze to death. They were hanging on by their fingernails. But still, they wouldn't go home. They wouldn't give up. And the king, sitting back in London, decides this has got to change. So what he did, he and his ministers came up with something called the Southern Strategy, because they had always believed, ever since the war started 5 years before, that there were a lot more Tories, or people who supported the crown, living down south in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, than there were up in Massachusetts. And so they came up with the genius move, let's send an army of beautiful redcoats down south and let them march through the countryside. And thousands of Tories will come in and flock to the cause, and they'll just move up the coast and go from one state to another and take over each of those colonies and get them back into the possession of the king, and this war will be over. And so they put together, General Clinton in New York, put together a huge army and put them on ships. And they went down south. And their mission was Charleston, South Carolina, which was then the most populous, the most prosperous city in the South. And they landed south of that, down at Seabrook Island. You all know where Seabrook Island is? It's just picture this. You've got thousands of British soldiers coming ashore in those rowboats, and they land, and they go past the golf courses, and they go past the multi-million-dollar condominium, past the crab houses, head on up just north of Kiowa Island, cross over the inland waterway, go up to the airport, take a hard right, come down the peninsula, and they seal up Charleston and the American army inside of Charleston, and you have a siege. And sieges usually always end the same way. After about 30 to 40 days, the Americans ran out of food and they had to surrender. It was the worst catastrophe of American arms until the Civil War. Some 5,000 troops went into captivity, along with a lot of horses, which you couldn't, that was pretty valuable too, a lot of politicians, which we could have lived without anyway, and a lot of officers as well. Now those poor troops, when they surrendered, what did they do with them? They had something out in the harbor called prison hulks. Back in those days, when you had merchant ships, and after they outlived their useful life, you just took them out and just left them in the sound just to rot. Well, these became POW facilities. And what they do is they take those prisoners, put them down below, and they throw whatever food they wanted down to them. And the only way you got out of that was going out the porthole when you were dead, or when the war finally ended. It was tough stuff. So this was a catastrophe. But one thing, down at the British moved into Charleston, one thing they discovered real quick was they discovered East Bay Street. General Clinton loved East Bay Street. They got a little restaurant down there called Magnolia's. And Magnolia's has the finest shrimp and grits on the planet, made with pure cream. Pure cream. Has the highest calorie content of any food you could possibly eat in the United States today. And Clinton was just gorging himself on these shrimp and grits until finally he said, no, it's time for me to go home. So he took about a third of the army and went back to his girlfriend up in New York City, and he left Lord Cornwallis down here to take care of the fight. And he told Cornwallis, you know what to do, start down here, start moving up through the states and take them one at a time. So Lord Cornwallis got busy at doing it, and he went out into South Carolina. You can see all these little places in kind of western South Carolina 96, and Rocky Mountain, Hanging Rock, and all these places. He set up outposts up there, and some Tories did come in and join his troops up there, and he wanted to establish his base in South Carolina before he moved up into North Carolina. Well, the American Congress, in its incredible wisdom, sent down a guy named General Horatio Gates with an army from Charlotte, and they came into South Carolina to try to defeat Cornwallis. And they met him, you can see it right up in the middle part of your paper, a place called Camden, South Carolina. Gates was a fool, and Gates led his troops into an attack against a superior force, and Cornwallis was a very good general. And within a few minutes, his troops were in full retreat. He took this seriously. He hopped on his horse, and within 2 days, he rode all the way to Hillsborough, North Carolina, on his horse, leaving his troops behind, which of course endeared him to his troops. They spoke great praises of him all the time. And so an American army had been eliminated. So Cornwallis decided it's about time. I'm about ready to go. But he was kind of worried because over off to his left, and if you look at the map, it'll be over on this side of the map. You see right up here at the top is a little place called Sycamore Shoulder. Before he moved into North Carolina, he was worried about some troops force coming down from the mountains and hitting him in the left flank. Because this crowd up here was called the Over the Mountain Men. And these were folks that had moved over the mountains, as the name implies, and had purchased land directly from the Cherokees, and they literally carved their homes out of the wilderness. This was as tough a crowd as America has ever produced. And they didn't pay any heed to anybody. They didn't pay any heed to the British. They didn't pay any heed to the Continental Congress. They were their own folks, and they were going to do things the way they wanted to do them. Well, he couldn't have that potential adversary out there. So he told he had a fellow called Patrick Ferguson, a British officer who was in charge of his Tories, and he said, I want you to move over in that direction and subdue those folks so we can move on up into North Carolina. And Patrick Ferguson took his army, a couple thousand men, and went up into western North Carolina and issued an edict across the mountains into the area of the Over the Mountain Men. And he said to them, if you do not pledge allegiance to the king and lay down your arms, I'm going to cross over these mountains. I'm going to burn your crops, burn your houses, run off your animals, repossess your SUVs, and shoot your dogs. Now, I don't know how many of you might be from Tennessee, particularly East Tennessee. You don't tell people you're going to mess with their dogs. And all of a sudden, a group of something like 1,500 settlers came together. Each man had a horse, had a rifle, had a little bag with some corn in it, and they became an instant army. And they crossed over those mountains, and they chased Patrick Ferguson and his Tories down at a little place called Kings Mountain, just outside of Charlotte. Patrick Ferguson had his men on top of this mountain, and he knew these guys were after him. He said, I'm on top of this mountain, nobody's going to knock me off this mountain. Well, sure enough, here come the Americans. They've been doing this for a week now, coming across the mountains. They're tired, they're hungry, etc. They don't care. They're ready for a fight. And they swarm around this mountain and start attacking up the mountain. And so you got the Tories on the top shooting down, and you got the American Over the Mountain men coming up from the bottom. Now, one thing for those of you who shoot, if you're on top of a mountain and you're shooting down, you tend to shoot high. If you're on the bottom of the mountain and you're looking up at the top, those targets are silhouetted against the sky. They make mighty fine targets. Well, Patrick Ferguson wanted to rally his troops, so he jumped on his big white horse with his red plaid shirt, flapping his hat back and forth like this, and rode back and forth along top of this mountain trying to get his troops all riled up for the fight. And down at the base of that mountain, every single one of those young men was looking up that hill saying, I'm going to get a piece of him. And they unloaded on him, and by the time he hit the ground, he had several bullets in him, and he was dead as a doornail. By the way, he's still there. If you want to go see Patrick Ferguson today, he's under a pile of rocks in the National Military Park today, so I urge you to go visit him there. Well, the Americans fought their way to the top. The Tories saw this wasn't going well, and they surrendered. The Americans took them prisoner, and they promptly held a court-martial because there had been lots of fighting going on between the Tories and the local patriots for the last year. Lots of crimes had been committed. And they took about 9 of these guys and strung them up from a tree. And once word of that leaked out to the other Tory community, Tory enthusiasm kind of dwindled throughout North and South Carolina, as you can imagine. horrific defeat for the British. They had to hold off now. They couldn't continue their move into North Carolina because Cornwallis had just lost his whole western force. Well, about this time, the Congress did something smart. I know it's impossible to believe, but they did. Because General Horatio Gates had been such, and they had picked him to come down and head the army to the South, because he had been such a train wreck. They let General Washington pick the next new officer to come command the South. And General Washington picked a guy named Nathaniel Greene. Does that sound familiar? Our city's named after him. There's cities and high schools and everything's named after him all over the country today. And this was Washington's second best, was Washington's best officer. In fact, Washington chose him as his replacement if he ever got killed. Nathaniel Greene was an interesting fellow. He come from a Quaker family. And he'd been kicked out of the Quakers because he signed up for the military when the war started. And he had learned by reading books and just by doing. And he'd actually been in charge of supplies for General Washington back during the horrible times right after Valley Forge. And he made it work. So Washington thought the world of him. And he told Nathaniel, he said, Nathaniel, I want you to go down south. And there's just a couple of things I want you to remember. We cannot lose another army. We lost one in Charleston. We've lost one at Camden. We can't lose another one, or this war could be over. He says, so keep them together. And I want you to go down there and harass them and retake South Carolina and all the South and push them out. Greene came down south and took command in late 1780, early 1781 in Charlotte. And he looked at his army, and he probably sent half of them home. They literally didn't have shoes on. They didn't have coats. Some didn't have weapons. His army was hanging on by its fingernail. And he put together his force and decided, I can't sustain this force. So he split his force into two. He took half the army and went down to Sherall, South Carolina, which is one of the biggest speed traps in South Carolina. I have donated some money to the people around Sherall, South Carolina. If you go that way, and Society Hill's even worse, but Sherall is really good. And he took the other half and gave it to a fellow named Dan Morgan, old wagon master from Virginia. And he went over into the western part of South Carolina, around an area called Cowpens, South Carolina. Well, Cornwallis decides, okay, I've got to go ahead and start this thing. And he sees that Greene has divided his army. He says that's a great time to get them to defeat them in detail. So he takes his cavalry commander, a guy by the name of Benestra Tarleton. How many of y'all saw the movie The Patriots with Mel Gibson a few years ago? Okay, the history's awful, but it's a great movie. I mean, we win, that's all that counts. But the history is not accurate. But the demon in that movie, the bad guy, was patterned after Benestra Tarleton. He had quite a reputation. His men gave no quarter. He understood what war was all about, and he fought it to the hill. Well, Cornwallis told him, I want you to go up there and catch Dan Morgan up around the Cowpens to see if you can't take him out. And he did. He went up there, found Dan Morgan, and the Cowpens, the reason they call it the Cowpens is basically that part of South Carolina was just all woods. And there happened to be a clearing where you would bring your cattle in and gather them up before you would take them down to Charleston to sell them. And Dan Morgan had gotten his troops together. He had some Continentals and he had some mostly militia. And he'd set those men up in 3 lines. And he basically told them, he said, first line, just fire 2 shots and you go home. Soften them up. And then they keep advancing, our second line will hit them. And then when they finally get to our 3rd line, that's where he put his best troops. And he thought, maybe they'll be weak enough, we can take them out. Well, Tarleton comes in, all full of, vim and vinegar, and he immediately attacks across the field at the American line. And sure enough, the first line fires shots and starts to fall back like it's supposed to. And Tarleton sees that and thinks, well, they're running. It's time to send in my whole force. So he sends them all across that field. The Americans pull back, but they had planned to pull back all along. And during the process, they kind of circled around, and all of a sudden, he runs up on the Continentals, and they level a volley right in his face and kill a lot of his troops. And he looks around, and suddenly he's got Americans on all sides of him, and he's surrounded. He manages to cut his way out, but 1,000 of his people do not. And they're all either killed or captured at Cowpens, South Carolina. Horrible blow to Cornwallis. But Cornwallis, when he hears this news, decides, well, I'm going to get Dan Morgan, and I'm going to retake those prisoners, those 800, 900 prisoners he took. Morgan starts moving into central North Carolina. Here comes Cornwallis chasing. And Greene, on hearing about this, moves into North Carolina and says, I'm gonna meet up with Dan Morgan, and maybe we'll have enough troops to defeat Cornwallis. We have something called the Race to the Dan River. If you look across at your map, you see rivers go across. You've got the Yadkin, the Calva, and eventually the Dan River up north. And Greene would run to the next river once he met up with Morgan. They'd get across the river, and then they'd bring all the boats onto their side of the river. Cornwallis would come up. He'd have no boats to get across. And so he had to find another way across. But he kept coming. He kept coming. He burned all his wagons and a lot of his supplies because he wanted to move a lot quicker. And so he did that. But eventually he got up north at a place called Boyd's Ferry in Virginia. You see it just across the state line. It's now South Boston, Virginia. And Greene got to the north side of the river. Here comes Cornwallis to the south side. No way to get across. He says, the heck with this. And he doesn't have enough troops to stay in Virginia because Virginia's the most populous state in the nation at that time. And he knew there was a lot of militia would come and coalesce around Greene. So he pulled back into Hillsborough, right there in the middle, and declared, I've now captured North Carolina. It's time for all good Tories to come in and join the flag of the crown, et cetera, et cetera. And his troops by now were in pretty ragged condition. So Tories would come in, take one look at them and say, sure, I'm glad you guys are here. We'll see you later and go back home again. So there was no massive uprising that he had anticipated. General Greene, just north of the river up there, he gets reinforced to where he's got a pretty sizable army, and he decides to move back in March of 1781, move back into North Carolina. He does, and for a few weeks, he and Cornwallis do a little kabuki dance across the northern part of North Carolina, and come March 14th, 1781, the night of, the British are camped around Deep River Friends Meeting. You all now knew that as the heart of Mall Land, because on the highway down there. And Greene is camped at a place called Guilford Courthouse, which is now inside Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Cornwallis gets his men up in the middle of the night and starts marching for Guilford Courthouse. He says, this thing is going to be determined. And he runs into American cavalry along New Garden Road, right there at New Garden Friends Meeting. If y'all haven't been there, New Garden Friends Meeting, there's a big cemetery in the back, including a lot of Revolutionary soldiers that are buried there. And there's a place where they got stones at each corner where the old church building was, a log building. And his army came marching right by there and turned on to New Garden Road. And they're fighting off American cavalry, and he knows just 2 or 3 miles up the road, he's going to run into the main American army. Now I want you to picture this. You've got 2,000 of the finest troops in the world, dressed out in all that red gear that you see pictures of all the time. And they're marching down New Garden Road in perfect order. And they go past Red Robins. And they go past McAllister. Kick-back Jacks, they go past Kick-back. They advance past Target, go down into the hills where those condominiums are they haven't sold in the last 10 or 15 years. Up over the hill and come down to the shopping center, and they form up in line of battle in the parking lot of Chick-fil-A. The Americans are up the hill on the other side of the hospice house. They're formed up on, guess what? 3 lines. Greene had listened to what Dan Morgan did at Cowpen. He did exactly the same thing here. He had his North Carolina militia. Now let me explain what militia are. Militia would be like all of us getting together once a quarter at a tavern, that was a requirement, and we go out and we do the manual arms with our musket, then we go have a drink. Then we come back and do the manual arms with our musket, then we go have 2 drinks. And we work our way through the day, and hopefully we were still sober enough to walk home at the end of the period of time. And what we had were basically shotguns. That's what muskets were. And we were going to, these militia formed up, they were going to face the most professional army in the world today. It'd be like us taking on the Navy SEALs. You know, not a very good prospect for that. But that's what they were prepared to do. So Greene had put his first line with North Carolina militia. His second line were Virginia militia, who had a little bit more experience. His third line were around the courthouse were his Continentals. These were the guys that actually wore blue uniforms. They were from Maryland. They supposedly knew what they were doing. And he told them all, guys, just fire a few rounds, keep falling back on the third line. We'll win this thing at the third line. Cornwallis formed up around a place called the Hoskins House, which is still there today, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And began his move in the early afternoon up the hill. Now imagine, 2,000 men lined up, flags flying, the whole bit across a muddy field. And they get to the other side, and the American first line unloads on them. But they, being the best in the world, fix their bayonets, they advance through that, they get to the second line. They're now in the woods. It's hard to keep formations in the woods where you have trees and brush and all the rest of it. But they fight past that. And then they fight to the third line. Lord Cornwallis's precedent has been forward, go forward. In fact, he nearly rode into the American line, so it was so confusing until a sergeant reached up to grab the bridle of his horse and pulled him back. They come up finally to the fields around Guilford Courthouse, which is a small structure, log structure we believe, and there was a little hamlet there. And there they see the Americans lined up on the other end of the field. And the British, being sure they were victory, they charged right across the field into the American line, and guess what happened? The Americans do not run this time. And suddenly you've got a big fight developing. And within the next few minutes, the Americans start pushing back. And suddenly you have a giant, imagine a giant bar fight with 2,000 people in it. And they're using hatchets, they're using fists, they're using muskets. You didn't have time to reload your weapons, so you were using them as clubs. It was just a horrendous fight. Lots of casualties, people getting killed and hurt, etc. Cornwallis rides up to see this and is startled to see it pushing back toward his side of the field. And he has a couple of artillery pieces. And he tells the artillerymen, load those things with canister, grape shot, which are basically bags of metal balls, and fire into that mass of men, both British and American. We got to stop this thing or I'm fixing to lose. They fire the guns, and it achieves its purpose. It startles both of them. And the Americans start to pull back to their side, the British to their side. At this time, one of the American units breaks and runs, and the British advance a little bit across the field, but they don't have that vim and vigor they did 2 hours before when this thing started. And they start pulling back. General Greene, remembering what Washington told him, don't lose another army, gave the order to withdraw up to a place called Troublesome Creek Ironworks, which is up in Randolph County today. Cornwallis gets his troops together and says, I won a battle. Because in those days, if you were still on the ground at the end of the battle, you were the winner. That's the way it worked. And then the casualty reports started coming in. He had lost 500 of his troops, of his 2,000 troops. Think about this room, 1 out of every 4 of us was on the ground, either dead or dying or badly injured. He's in the middle of where he doesn't want to be, very hostile North Carolina, and he sees this campaign is going to pieces very quickly. He stayed here 2 days and leaves smallpox behind to ravage the local community. And he takes his army and goes down to Wilmington, all the way across the state, you can see on your map. And he hopes he can be reinforced with troops there. There are no troops there. There's some, he gets some supplies there, and he decides, I'm not going back into central North Carolina again. He heads up into Virginia, and 6 months later goes into a little place called Yorktown. Still so weakened from what happened to him here at Guilford Courthouse. The road to Yorktown started 4 miles that way, right here in what is Greensboro, North Carolina, at Guilford Courthouse. General Greene takes his army back to South Carolina because those were his instructions to retake that place, and proceeds to fight battle after battle and never wins a battle. But after each battle, the British are so weakened that they pull back closer to Charleston. So by the time of Yorktown, Greene has retaken all of South Carolina except for Charleston. And he would say, you know, we fight, we get beat, we rise and fight again. He's not known for saying this, but it turned out to be the most successful strategic commander we had, along with Washington. So the war finally comes to a close. And Greensboro, North Carolina, which doesn't exist until 1808, the fields where those men fought were just out in the farm area. In the 1880s, a local businessman named Judge Shank put together a group of business people. And he thought it ridiculous that such an important battle in the Revolution people didn't know anything about it. And even the locals couldn't tell you what happened where. So he went out and they started buying up land that was in part of the battle site. And they formed something called the Guilford Battleground Company. And their job was to buy the land and try to turn it into a memorial park so people would remember. It became a real big deal. I mean, every July 4th, that's where Greensboro went out there. And then they put the General Greene statue in later. It became a big deal. In 1917, it was given to the federal government and became the first national military park in the United States, right here in Greensboro. And later it moved from the War Department over to the Interior Department. They're the ones that still run it today. Okay, the Guilford Battleground Company at that time disappeared. because their job was done. And most of them died out. Jump forward to 1983. You know, I was born here. My mom and dad used to take me out there to the battlefield. And I remember there was this house outside, the hospice house, that was still there. It had some signage in front of it talking about what happened there. And that place always really impressed the Dickens out of me. I'm a history nut anyway. And I read an article in the paper that land with the hospice house on it, which had not been included in the national park because it remained in the same family for 150 years. That land was going to be turned into a shopping center. You know, something Greensboro desperately needed one more of. And so a group of us got together, some JCs, some buddies at Merrill Lynch. We formed a new Guilford Battleground company. And we approached the owners and got them to sell the house. There were 3 owners actually, and about 6 or 7 acres of land around it to us. And with the intention, we would turn it into a park for the city of Greensboro. The Guilford County ended up, city of Greensboro ended up. We raised a lot of private money, and blessings on blessings, it happened. We were able to purchase that property and turn it into something we call Tannenbaum Park. And we named it Tannenbaum Park in honor of the Tannenbaum family, Tannenbaum Sternberger family, who did so much to support us, like they do so many great causes around the city. It progressed very well. We eventually built something called the Colonial Heritage Center, a museum on the site to tell the story of local people and how this area was developed. The kids today are not hearing this. They know nothing about this, and we developed primarily aimed at the kids so they could get a glimpse of what it was like to live back before you had stores, back before you had these things and all the rest of this stuff. And it was pretty successful. About 10 years ago, we could see the handwriting on the wall that we were part of the Parks and Rec Department of the city of Greensboro, and soccer moms who wanted new fields were getting the dollars, and they weren't coming to an old log cabin down there. And so we approached the federal government, said, will you guys take it? And we had a great director at that time of the national park, and he worked it through, and so it became part of the national park system, which it is today. Our thing was very simple. The feds never run out of money. Well, guess what? The feds ran out of money right after we did that. And the Colonial Heritage Center, unfortunately, was closed several years later because of lack of funding. We had a deal set up to go in and to reopen it with funding that the Battleground Company would pay for and with new exhibits. And then we had that cold spell last year, in January of last year. You know the story, the pipes burst, incredible damage in the building. To repair that, to bring the building up to code would have cost $1 million, $2 million. And so the federal government made a decision that they're going to tear it down, which they'll be doing in the next week. So that will go away. But the most important thing is the battlefield area was preserved, and it's still there. And now, in the last 10 years, we're in the process of, with the Park Service, of buying all the land between us and the national park that was battlefield land and getting it into the park. So we've been expanding the park all along to save that land. So when I started this thing a few minutes ago, I told you, I posited the question, why is this so important? And this is what I want you to take away from here before everybody leaves. I'm going to sit down and shut up here in just a second. And that is, the story of Guilford Courthouse belongs to everybody in this room, every single American. I don't care if your people came over on the Mayflower or you just got your papers signed last week. If you're an American, the story of what those men did that day, when they didn't have to be there, and they knew there was a good chance they'd be dead within the next 30, 45 minutes, that's a story you should all be proud of, you should tell your kids about, and your kids are not hearing it from the school systems, unfortunately, so they got to hear it from somebody. So I would urge you to take that to heart when you leave here, that what those people did, they didn't have to do, they did it, and we're all the beneficiaries of it today. Thank you very much.